Hi, and welcome to the 11th lecture on Shakespeare's Hamlet. Today, let's turn to Act 5, Scene 1. I'm on page 1477 in your anthologies, and this scene is often referred to as the graveyard scene. And it opens, if you recall, with two grave diggers, and they are in the process of digging Ophelia's grave. And the first gravedigger is referred to in your text as the clown. And you could consider him a kind of licensed fool, someone who is speaking truth to power. But at any rate, I don't want to go into too much detail concerning his role, but look at what he says here at the opening, line 1. He turns to the other gravedigger and he asks, "Is she to be buried in Christian burial when she willfully seeks her own salvation?" He's referring to Ophelia. Is Ophelia to be buried? Is she to receive a Christian burial with all the rites that pertain to Christian burials? Is she to be buried in sacred ground when she willfully seeks her own salvation, when she deliberately took her own life? And it raises the question of suicide again, doesn't it? And the word salvation here, when she willfully seeks her own salvation, if you notice in the text, there's a footnote in your text that says, footnote 1, probably a mistake for damnation. She willfully seeks her own damnation because suicide was a mortal sin. Suicides were not ordinarily permitted Christian burial in consecrated ground with the church's blessing and ritual. So the clown here, as I said, assuming the role of the licensed fool, he errs in the word salvation. He uses the word salvation rather than the word damnation, suggesting that she deliberately seeks her own salvation to ascend into heaven as opposed to ascend into hell, her own damnation, because she willfully takes her own life. So she should be damned. If she deliberately took her own life, deliberately killed herself, then she should be eternally damned according to Orthodox Christianity. But I think Shakespeare's making a point here too in having the clown use the wrong word, because if you think about it, the realist would argue here that she deliberately seeks her own salvation, that she took her own life, she kills herself because she wishes to save herself from the suffering and the misery, the pain that she's experiencing while she is existing. So you could see that there is a reason here for Shakespeare having the clown misspeak. It's an interesting point, something to think about. The other gravedigger responds, "I tell thee she is to have a Christian burial. Therefore, make her grave straight. The crowner hath sat on her and finds it Christian burial." In other words, the inquest was held and the coroner determined that she did not commit suicide. And raises an interesting question. Why was there any doubt surrounding Ophelia's death? Was it a suicide or was it an accident? The first clown, or the first gravedigger, the clown, the gravedigger who's referred to as the clown in the text, for some reason he believes that he's shocked to discover that Ophelia is to have a Christian burial. And if you recall, a few pages into this scene, I'm on page 1482. This is a passage when Ophelia is being buried, and Ophelia's brother Laertes asks the priest, who is heading the ceremony, performing the ceremony, at line 211, Laertes wants to know why there isn't a full ceremony that's being given to Ophelia, why she isn't receiving a full ceremony. And the priest responds at line 211, her death was doubtful. There was suspicion surrounding her death. It wasn't certain. Did she commit suicide? Did she take her own life? Or was it an accident? There's some doubt surrounding what exactly happened. And but that great command or sways the order. In other words, Claudius and Gertrude have ordered that uh, even though there is doubt surrounding Ophelia's death, the circumstances of her death, Claudius and Gertrude have determined that she will indeed have a Christian burial, and they are the king and queen. They are the royal authority, and therefore Ophelia does receive um, Christian burial. And but that great command or sways the order, she should in ground unsanctified been lodged till the last trumpet representing here or suggesting the day of judgment, when, according to Orthodox Christianity, the Christian God returns to earth and passes judgment on all those Christians or on all people, and determines who will be rewarded by and ascend into heaven and who will be damned and uh, descend into hell, the last trumpet call. And the priest here is saying she should not have been buried in sanctified ground, that she should have been buried in ground unsanctified. And that's what he's saying here because of this doubt and suspicion surrounding her death. So I think that's why the clown, back at the beginning of the scene, Act 5, Scene 1, Line 1, this is why he's surprised to find that she is to have a Christian burial. And so the second gravedigger tells the clown, yes, she is to have Christian burial, the according to the coroner. And the clown responds, how can that be? Unless she drowned herself in her own defense. And again, it's interesting, this word defense. She drowned herself in her own defense. Why would she drown herself in her own defense? Why would she take her own life to defend herself? Again, is the clown misspeaking here? I would suggest here defense. She's defending herself by taking her own life. If indeed it was a suicide, it would be defending herself from existence itself, from the anguish, the agony that she is suffering. She would wish to end existence and therefore defend herself from the pain she's experiencing. And the second gravedigger says, why, 'tis found so. And the clown again misspeaks. He says, it must be se offendendo, a Latin expression. And again, there's a footnote in your text that the clown once more, this is footnote number 3, the clown once more is making an error. He means to say error for se defendendo. In other words, killing in self-defense. But perhaps Shakespeare's making yet another point, because realists might argue that she does offense to herself, to her own body. She physically harms her own body in self-defense. Uh, so in self-defense, she harms herself. So it's the idea, the notion that suicide, taking one's own life, many would argue, or realists would argue, that it's a courageous act because it means, particularly when one doesn't have means to end one's life with dignity. We talked last time about the issue of physician-assisted suicide. If one has to do violence to oneself, to one's physical self, to one's person, that can be quite frightening and painful. And why would someone do such violence to oneself? Well, in here, again, she does offense to herself in self defense, to defend herself. So there must be a pain greater for Ophelia. Now, again, we're imagining that she did take her own life. There must have been a pain greater for Ophelia than the pain of actually doing physical harm to herself. So, it's the notion that to end her suffering, which is too great, too overwhelming, she is able to harm herself, to do violence to herself, to harm herself physically, and in this case by drowning. Um, this question of suicide that opens Act 5, we've seen this question before in the to be or not to be soliloquy. And also, this idea of uh, did she willfully seek her own uh, salvation or damnation, however you prefer to read that line? Um, it brings up this problem of free will again, doesn't it? And recall, we've made a number of arguments. Uh, the realist would argue that, first of all, the problem for people who believe in free will, there's this problem of definition. The word free itself is an empty concept. It doesn't mean anything unless it's being used in context. So if I say I'm free, you don't know what I'm talking about unless I give you the context in which I'm free. So if I've just escaped, or if I've escaped, if I've just been, yeah, if I've just escaped from prison and I say I'm free from prison, now you understand what it is I'm free from. So there's a problem with the idea of freedom itself. Uh, you have to think of when you use the word, it doesn't mean anything. It is an empty concept unless it's being used contextually. And so then the question becomes, what are we free from? What can we be free from? Are we free from our experiences in life? Are we free from our bodily sensations? Are we free from the thoughts that arise in consciousness? Are we free from our feelings, our emotions that arise in consciousness? Um, are we free from the situations we find ourselves in from moment to moment? Are we free from the culture we're raised in? Are we free from reason? If we learn that 1 plus 1 equals 2, if we understand what oneness, the concept of oneness, and if we understand the concept of two-ness, and if we understand addition and equalness, if we understand these concepts and we learn, therefore, that 1 plus 1 equals 2, are we free to believe otherwise? Would we want to believe otherwise? Uh, are we free from reason, from logic? So there is a problem when it comes to free will, the very definition itself. What specifically are we free from? And then the second problem that uh, this concept raises is the idea, um, the scientific argument, if you recall, from our observations that the law of causality, the law of cause and effect, is operating everywhere. Everywhere in the universe that we observe. Um, the law of causality, everything that exists, and that includes human beings, you and me, and everything that occurs, human actions, thoughts, feelings, beliefs, sensations, everything that exists or occurs in the universe has a totality of causes, and that causes make their effects inevitable. We've discussed that in some detail. And so, from these scientific experiments and observations from the data we've collected, and there's just an overwhelming amount of data that that supports the law of causality. From this, we can philosophically, rationally deduce. We can arrive at the philosophical truth by rationally deducing that there is no such thing as free will. That everything that exists or occurs within the universe is inevitable. It's not as if human beings are free, uh, somehow separate and distinct from the physical universe, and that they somehow can break the law of causality, the law of inevitability. So that we can't, we can observe the law of causality. We can flip a coin, and if we know that the angle at which we flip the coin and the distance and the velocity and uh, uh, the weight of the coin, etc. If we have all of these variables, we can plug them into our mathematical formula. And math, recall, is a physical, it's just a formulaic depiction of the physical reality. So we can know exactly how the coin will fall if we have all of the variables. So this idea that somehow these laws can be broken, that there's somehow randomness perhaps in the universe or chance or luck, we've seen that there's a problem uh, holding these beliefs. And so we can observe the scientific, we can do scientific experiments and observe the evidence. But of course, when we philosophize, we're thinking abstractly. Uh, we can't observe determinism operating in humans. We would not be able to observe humans freely willing either. Uh, we have to deduce from the evidence. So, in other words, we're thinking abstractly when we're philosophizing. But as I've said, philosophy is a branch of science because the philosophical truths are all derived from the scientific experiments, the observations, the empirical evidence. So, yeah, we've discussed that too, haven't we? And also, the third reason, the third problem that people who subscribe to uh, this idea of free will, we talked about with Hamlet in this play, is the idea. Remember, Hamlet is a Christian and he believes in an all powerful deity who knows the future, who knows everything occurring in the present, and who also knows the future. And so when Hamlet is questioning to be or not to be, or when Hamlet's wondering if he should, and during the prayer scene, if he should kill Claudius, the Christian God, uh, being an all powerful uh, deity, entity, would know in advance what Hamlet's choice will be. The God would have to know if he is all knowing. And there is no way that Hamlet could choose otherwise, because that would mean that the God was not all knowing. So this problem is raised specifically in for monotheists who subscribe to this idea of an all powerful, an all knowing, and all powerful being. And you remember the chief monotheistic religions are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And so, again, this issue of free will, Shakespeare is constantly looking at it from different angles, exploring it from different angles. He's thinking precisely on this particular issue in his plays. Um, if you ever read Macbeth, you'll see that issue raised again, the issue of determinism in the play Macbeth. So I'll leave you with that. Uh, Perhaps you might be interested in exploring that play, reading that play, and thinking about it, analyzing it. And here again, what does Shakespeare do? He raises yet another problem concerning this particular belief, the belief in free will. And that is, in this case, we recall that Ophelia is mentally, she's suffering from a psychiatric disorder. She's uh, has a mental disorder. She's not in possession of her rational faculties. She's had a break with reality, a severe break. And so her brain is no longer modeling the reality around her. And so it raises the question of how could she possibly uh, be free to choose here? Um, since she isn't capable. And if you recall, this whole question of whether she should be buried in consecrated ground, uh, remember that Christianity, the religion, is founded on this concept of free will. That's its foundation, because without free will, there can't be, without the ability for the Christian to choose, there can't be this concept of sin. The question of to sin or to not to sin, right? Should the if the Christian chooses one way and sins in doing so, he is punished, or he may be punished for all eternity in the Christian hell. And if he chooses not to commit the sin, he may be rewarded for all eternity in the Christian heaven. So the concepts of a Christian heaven and a Christian hell, and the concept of sin, rely on this idea of a system of reward and punishment for one's actions, because one's actions are freely chosen, is all based on this idea of free will, which I would argue these plays uh, uh, are questioning and asking us to think about them in more detail and think about them more precisely. If you can say more precisely, think about them precisely. Um, so it does raise this issue. The problem of free will again is raised yet again, and but this time Shakespeare, I would argue, is exploring it from a different angle. When we think about people, for example, who do suffer from mental disorders, or if we think, for example, about people some sort of who've experienced some sort of trauma to the brain and are no longer capable of rational thought, for example. Or you could think of brain diseases, tumors, for example. Um, Alzheimer's disease, there's an illustration. We think of children. Children certainly aren't fully rational. Can they be responsible? It's a question that keeps raising more questions, doesn't it? It doesn't resolve the issue. It's simply this idea that human beings are free. It doesn't really answer uh, any questions, and it closes the door on the scientific facts and the philosophical truths we've derived from those facts. And I would argue, or the realist would argue, that it really is an insult to uh, human intelligence to ignore those facts or to dismiss them, dismiss those truths that those facts point to, the scientific data points to. So, well, what did happen to Ophelia? What exactly what are the circumstances surrounding her death? What happened here? Let's take a moment to turn back to Act 4, Scene 7, which is on the opposite page here in your anthologies, page 1476. And you'll have to excuse me, I'm getting over a cold today. I'm on page 1476 in your anthologies. This is Act 4, Scene 7. And if you'll recall, at the end of this scene, uh, Claudius and Laertes are conspiring, they're plotting together to do Hamlet in, to kill Hamlet. And their scheming is interrupted by the queen, Gertrude. She enters and announces, informs them that Ophelia is drowned. And then she describes the drowning itself. And I believe it's the longest speech the queen has in the play. And really an interesting speech here, interesting monologue here that perhaps we should look at it and analyze it in some depth so we can come to a better understanding of just what occurred here, what happened to Ophelia. The Queen says, beginning at line 167, there is a willow grows aslant the brook that shows his hoar leaves in the glassy stream. So notice automatically here that the queen, when she speaks of Ophelia's drowning, she has it's a very poetic passage, isn't it? It's almost lyrical. Um, there's a tendency here, I would argue, the queen, I would argue she is, yes, a romantic, and she is, in a sense, romanticizing Ophelia's death here. Perhaps it's a way to distance herself from the reality, the horrors of the death itself. But she does portray it in this rather poetic, lyrical way. Um, this is how she describes, how she depicts Ophelia's death. What's interesting, you can look online and look at all the paintings that artists have done of Ophelia drowning, and I would say that the majority of them do romanticize her death as well. It looks very calm, very peaceful. Uh, it looks as if it's sort of prettified. The images are uh, you know, they're drawn, they're the colors and so forth. They're presented in a way that doesn't disturb one terribly. Now, there are a few images that are disturbing. Yes, there are some realist painters out there presenting her death too, but the majority of them do tend to romanticize her death, and perhaps they're taking their cue here from Gertrude's depiction. There is a willow grows aslant the brook that shows his hoar leaves in the glassy stream. Interesting how nature is being personified here. Again, a romantic idea, the personification of nature, the idea that, you know, uh, the universe itself, the biosphere. I'm reminded of those who subscribe to this idea of Gaia and the living universe, that it is conscious and it is feeling. This idea is a kind of romantic idea. There with fantastic garlands did she make of crowflowers, nettles, daisies, and long purples. So she's strung together different types of flowers, and then she made her way to the brook and to the willow tree that's growing over the brook, that's branches are reaching out over the brook beneath. And there at line 173, Gertrude continues, there on the pendant boughs, her coronet weaves clamoring to hang. So Ophelia is climbing out onto the branches of the willow tree, specifically onto a branch that is hanging over the brook. And what is Ophelia in the process of doing? She's hanging her flowers upon the branches of the tree. There on the pendant boughs, her coronet weeds clamoring to hang, an envious sliver broke. Again, notice here, this is interesting how the tree branch that Ophelia is clamoring on, that a twig or a branch here it's described as an envious sliver broke, suggesting some sort of uh, again, some sort of conscious intelligence behind the scene that is envious this malicious that wants to do Ophelia harm. So again, you could see this as a romantic way of seeing nature, couldn't you? I mean, if nature is possessed by good spirits, it's also there are bad spirits too that inhabit that are that permeate the natural world as well. So here we have an envious sliver broke, which down her weedy trophies and herself fell in the weeping brook. So when she climbs out upon this one particular branch, the branch breaks and she falls into the brook below. And look at her response. She's unaware of what has occurred here. Her clothes spread wide, and mermaid like a while they bore her up. Notice they her clothes allow her to survive temporarily as a mermaid is capable. A mermaid, of course, is a mythological creature that lives beneath the water, is able to live, to exist beneath the water. And here, so it is suggesting a kind of a miracle has occurred here because Ophelia suddenly has been transformed into a kind of mermaid where she has fallen into the brook, and because of her clothes have spread wide and they're acting as a natural buoy that's holding her up, and they're allowing Ophelia to survive temporarily, of course, because we know the realists would say that, well, she isn't a mermaid if she doesn't have this magical ability to breathe underwater to survive in that particular element. Being a human being, remember the law of identity. Each of us is everything that exists as something, and that something, whatever it is, has limitations. That whatever it is defines what those limitations are. Everything has specific characteristics, and those characteristics limit what it can do. And you don't have free will if you're stuck with particular limitations. So Ophelia falling into the brook, of course, doesn't have the freedom to transform into a mermaid and breathe underwater, of course. So the law of identity is a harsh law in this case for Ophelia. It's unrelenting. And she won't be able to survive long. But there is the suggestion here of a kind of miracle occurring at the moment because she does seem to be a kind of a mythological creature inhabiting a, a new element here, uh, right? The element of water here. And mermaid like a while they bore her up, which time she chanted snatches of old tunes. And some texts, when they uh, translate old tunes, they translate tunes as old hymns. So she's singing, you could imagine that she's singing uh, several Christian hymns that she most likely learned as a little girl. Remember, she too is a Christian and she's been raised in a Christian culture. And so here she's singing these tunes, these hymns that she's learned from childhood, which in time she chanted snatches of old tunes as one incapable of her own distress. So if she's unaware, not only is she unaware of her own situation here, the plight she's in, the dilemma before her, that she has fallen into the water. And so not only is she unaware, but also incapable. Could suggest that she can't possibly be aware. She's incapable because she is delusional at this point. She is suffering, as I said, from this uh, mental disorder. She has descended into madness. I don't know if it's politically correct to call it madness any longer, but she is suffering uh, um, she has suffering from insanity, if you will. Um, so she's incapable of her own distress, or like a creature. So that's one possibility. Is the reason why she's floating in the waters and doesn't appear to be in any way uh, in any anxiety or uh, disturbed at all or panicking, is because she's incapable. She's unaware again that she's has had that break with reality, that psychological break with the real world, and so she's simply unaware and she's incapable because of her particular disorder. Or perhaps the possibilities, or like a creature native and endued unto that element. So again, uh, this idea is she's not distressed or disturbed in any way. She's not anxious and panicking because she believes herself to be a mermaid, a creature native and accustomed, endued. What's the marginal note here for that? Habituated to. Yes, she uh, uh, believes herself to be like a creature native and endued unto that element, the element of water. So again, that's suggesting again that she is, uh, she has undergone this psychic break. But long it could not be, till that her garments, heavy with their drink, pulled the poor wretch from her melodious lay to muddy death. Again, the garments here pulling with their drink. Again, the garments here are being personified as well, too, as if to again to underscore that this is not a particular situation, that Ophelia is in this particular situation, and she is in no way responsible for what is occurring. The responsibility is elsewhere, doesn't lie with Ophelia, that she isn't innocent, and that she's in this vulnerable position because of her mental disease, her mental disorder. Um, and it one wonders just who has witnessed this scene, and why doesn't Shakespeare, why doesn't the text explain who has witnessed this scene? Uh, has Gertrude witnessed the scene? It doesn't sound as if she has. If she did, why would she not have called out for help or tried herself to rescue Ophelia? Because after all, Ophelia is, for some time, she is remaining afloat. Her garments are holding her up. They're acting as a kind of buoy, and they're holding her up above, keeping her above water. Did someone else witness this and convey? Is this information to Gertrude? And if so, if there was another witness or other witnesses, why did not they act? Why didn't they in some way attempt to pull Ophelia out of the water or come to her aid, come to her assistance here? Who just who has witnessed it? I mean, it, the question is raised, I think, because the passage is so detailed. The situation, the event is so detailed, and the duration of the death here does go on for some time. Um, so, just what is occurring here? Who is the witness? And I would argue that Shakespeare or the text deliberately doesn't reveal uh, to tell us uh, who exactly observed this occurring, because it's leaving us to wonder, and then we remember that this play of all of the characters, all the major characters in this play are Christians, And that the Hamletian world, therefore, according to their belief system, is set within a Christian universe. And so one has to wonder, well, one would know that the Christian God would be witnessing this scene. He is, after all, an all knowing deity. So the Christian God is certainly aware of Ophelia and Ophelia's plight, the terrible situation she's in, and that she's unaware and she can't save herself. So there may be a deliberate reason why uh, there isn't a witness, a specific witness introduced here in this passage. One has to wonder that, and then one does recall that yes, there is a witness, according to, at least from the perspective of the Christian romantics in the play, there would have been a witness, and that would be the Christian God. And once again, as Shakespeare does this time and time again in his plays, introduce these uh, controversial issues. And here we have the problem of evil being raised again. Only, I would argue, yet again, with a new twist, looking at it from another perspective, from a different angle, looking at this particular issue, this particular problem, the problem of evil, uh, uh, precisely exploring it from different directions. And remember, the problem is a theological problem. The problem exists only for romantics, and only specifically for uh, romantics who are monotheists. Remember, theism is the word, the theism is defined as holding a belief in a god or gods, and a monotheist is someone who holds a belief in one God. And again, Christianity is one of the three primary monotheistic religions. And if you recall, uh, traditional Christianity teaches that the Christian God, the Christian deity, is an all knowing being and an all powerful being, and finally, an all loving being. So these secondary traits, characteristics, are ascribed to the Christian God. And so one has to ask them. You can see why this problem arises for uh, the monotheist. If the Christian God knows that Ophelia is drowning, if he's an all knowing entity, and therefore is aware that Ophelia is drowning, and he realizes also that she's uh, um, suffering from a mental disorder, and if he's all powerful, if he can prevent her from drowning. And by the way, though it isn't mentioned here, again, it's poeticized, it's romanticized. Her death is seen somehow rather tranquil and uh, not particularly horrific in any way. But the realist would say no. I mean, Ophelia's drowning, to imagine what it would be like as she's dragged down to her muddy death. Um, to imagine drowning must be excruciating not to be able to breathe for a few. How long? How long did it take for Ophelia to drown here? And did she, did she suffer the physical suffering she must have undergone, as well as perhaps the anxiety, the distress, the emotional, the psychological suffering that she endured in drowning? So the realist would be quick to point out that her death most likely would have been horrific and very painful. Um, so then, why is it if this all-powerful deity did not interfere in some way and rescue Ophelia and save her from this excruciating horror, this excruciating pain, and this horrific situation she finds herself in? And then finally, if the Christian God is an all loving deity, he desires to rescue Ophelia. He doesn't want her to suffer, to be in pain. He doesn't want her to die, to be dragged down to her muddy death. So, this idea that he knows it's going on, He knows she's in the process of drowning. He can see it unfold. In fact, he knows she will drown because he is all knowing and he's all powerful, so he can prevent it very easily. There's nothing that can stop him from preventing it. And then finally, this idea that he's all loving, he desires, he wants to prevent it because he doesn't want her. He loves her, he cares for her, and he doesn't want her to be harmed. So why then does she drown? And in such a gruesome way. Why does this happen to Ophelia? And here the new angle again is what that we're looking at here is that one response that monotheist, that traditional Christianity, one response to this problem of evil is that human beings have been given free will. They make their own decisions, and therefore they should bear the consequences, the responsibilities of their decisions. And the Christian God, in giving them free will, is allowing them to act and to be free agents. And therefore, again, you have this idea, the concept of sin, which is built upon this this foundation, this bedrock notion of freedom of the will. And then again, the concept of sin leads to this idea of reward and punishment, the Christian heaven and the Christian hell. But we recall that Ophelia, suffering from a mental disorder, can't be free. She isn't rational. She can't be free to choose. How could she possibly freely choose here? If she's not even aware, if she's incapable of understanding the situation she's in, the dilemma that she's facing. And we're reminded again of those people, say, for example, with Alzheimer's disease, or people who've experienced severe trauma to the brain, severe injuries to the brain, or people who suffer from cancer of the brain tumors, for example. Uh, how can these people be held accountable for their actions when they too are apparently incapable of choosing freely? And children, the issue of children is raised. I imagine that Ophelia, again, like Juliet and Romeo and Juliet, she's very young. I would imagine she's 13 or 14, perhaps, maybe 15. But she isn't innocent. She is a child. And so she doesn't, her brain hasn't fully matured. It's still in the process of growing, of developing, of being programmed. It takes a long time for the human brain to be programmed. We're unlike many other species, right? We come into the world and basically we have very little, if any, programming. It takes quite a bit of time and experience and the learning process, reward and punishment for our programs to be running, up and running rationally. And she's a child still, if you will. It opens the door to this problem with children who are die in horrific ways from diseases or starvation or natural disasters. We recall the birth defects again from A Midsummer Night's Dream. We think of children who are abused by human beings, child molestation, kidnapping, mass school shootings. Uh, we think of all of these horrors that children across the planet experience daily. Every few seconds, I would imagine, a child is in some way suffering horribly. And this doesn't even bring to mind the other organisms on the planet. Remember, the other feeling sentient beings on the planet, they too have brains. And they too have built in, right? Brains, the primary function of all brains is to detect uh, problems and to avoid those problems. The brain is rewarded if it avoids problems. It's punished if it doesn't avoid the problems. And so this reward and punishment system goes hand in hand with a conscious sentient being, because all conscious sentient beings have brains. So the idea that some sort of conscious intelligent deity could create a planet that the realists would say it's unimaginable that some conscious intelligent being could create a planet in which, if you recall, 80 to 90% of all of the animals, the organisms of the planet are brutally slaughtered uh, in childhood before they reach maturation, before they reproduce. And then the next generation, it just keeps repeating. We've seen this idea before. The cycle of suffering and pain just keeps repeating. What conscious intelligence who would know beforehand all this suffering that was to unfold would say, that's good. That's a good creation. There's a plan. I'm good with that plan. So Shakespeare, or the play at least, in any case, the play is bringing up this question again, but this time looking at this problem of evil and considering it from Ophelia's particular situation, isn't it? The idea that she is suffering from a psychiatric disorder, that she is a child still, she is vulnerable, she's not accountable here. This is an accident, this isn't suicide. Um, and Again, the problem is a problem specifically for the romantic who subscribes to, for the monotheist who subscribes to, who upholds this particular uh, belief, this a belief in this kind of all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-loving deity. So yes, this play is saturated in death. And I was thinking that would make an excellent topic. Topic B, option B, the topic of death. You could discuss death's role in the play here. What is the play ultimately saying about death? Um, and You could look at, let's say, three deaths in particular in this play. Certainly, you would want to include Hamlet's death, but I also think you could look at Ophelia's death as well. So you could look at three characters in the play who do die in the play, and you could ask yourself, just what is this play's attitude toward death or toward dying? The attitude toward dying and toward death, or one or the other. That would make an excellent topic. Or you could also, for option C, we've raised these issues again, the problem of free will and the problem of evil. Um, you could certainly, for option C, well, or option B, you could look at these problems and ask yourself, how is the play exploring these problems? What is the play saying about evil, the problem of evil? What is the play saying about the problem of free will? Maybe you have a different take. Maybe you're interpreting it differently than I'm interpreting the text. That's fine. Yes, present your interpretation. Just remember to support it with evidence from the text. And just as long as your argument is rational, stays focused on the text, then I would say yes, absolutely. Uh, that would be uh, an option for you to explore. So you look at, or you look at these problems of evil and free will, and you could explore those for option C. You could write an argumentative essay. For those of you who prefer to write argumentative essays, you might either present the argument and use the text as I've done here as a kind of springboard into these controversial issues, or you could take the opposing viewpoint, counter argue, see if you can see if you can think of evidence to support this this idea that human beings do have free will. Can you find any evidence? Can you think of any reasons and provide evidence for those reasons that why you believe it is that human beings do indeed have freedom to choose? Or can you find a solution to the theological problem of evil, the monotheistic problem of evil? Can you provide reasoning and evidence to support your solution? So, though all of those ideas, I think, would make interesting essays. But just remember, if you choose option B or option C, just send me a working thesis and a working essay map, and uh, you know, bit of an outline, so I can just make sure that you're on the right track. So let's turn finally today to one of the most famous passages, moments in the play, and that is the scene between Hamlet and Yorick. And I'm in Act 5, Scene 1. We're still in the graveyard scene. I'm on page 1481. And if you've seen pictures advertising Hamlet, if you go online and you type in William Shakespeare's Hamlet, more than likely you will see the image of Hamlet holding up the skull of the court jester Yorick and looking directly into the the sockets, looking directly into the skull, the face of the face of the skull, the front of the skull. You have this confrontation, this direct confrontation, Hamlet confronting death, looking at death, and it's the iconic image, so you perhaps have already seen that image. At any rate, turn in your textbooks to page 1481, and if you recall, here at this moment, the clown, the first gravedigger, hands Hamlet the skull, Yorick's skull, the former court jester, when Hamlet was a little boy. And Hamlet holds the skull, he takes the skull and holds it up and begins to reflect. And he says at line 170, yes, here, line 171, Hamlet says, "Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath bore me on his back 1,000 times." So evidently here we learn that Hamlet had a rather close relationship with the court jester when Hamlet was a little boy. The court jester bore Hamlet on his back, gave Hamlet piggyback rides. And so there was a relationship, an intimate, close relationship. It appears that way because Hamlet is moved. He's touched. When he's handed the skull, he's in shock uh, that the former court jester, that this is the skull of the former court jester, a kind of father figure. Uh, yes, this would be interesting to explore. Here's a fourth father figure in the play. Father figure, another father. Perhaps, with the elderly King Hamlet being the king of Denmark, I'm sure he was quite busy, especially battling the king of Norway, in addition to being a great war hero. So perhaps Hamlet had an even closer relationship with York. Of course, I'm only conjecturing here, but nevertheless, there appears to have been a relationship. And Hamlet here at this moment, look what he says next. He hath bore me on his back 1,000 times, and now how abhorred in my imagination it is. My gorge rises at it. What is it specifically that is so abhorrent to Hamlet? What is so abhorrent in his imagination? Why is he feeling physically ill? Um, what is disgusting him so? What is this emotion that he's experiencing here? What's behind it here? Well, I would argue once again, we've seen it before. what's disturbing Hamlet most here is the idea that death, uh, all human beings were all going to die, and with death, uh, death seems to underscore this notion that in the end, life is absurd. Life holds no meaning because we all end in death. And so, this idea of absurdity, of meaninglessness, life doesn't seem ultimately, in the end, to have any point. It's pointless. There doesn't seem to be any meaning because ultimately each of us dies and is forgotten. And this is what is troubling Hamlet here. This is what is filling him with disgust to the point where he's feeling physically ill as if he's going to be sick. His gorge rises at it. Um, he says next here, look what he says. Here hung those lips that I have kissed, I know not how oft. So you can imagine child Hamlet being given piggyback rides and the father figure, the surrogate father here, and uh, the jester, the court jester, the licensed fool again, the one who speaks truth to power. Here again, we have this indication of their intimacy, the close nature of their relationship. But then something strange happens here. Hamlet becomes a kind of court jester himself, doesn't he? And we recall that he has assumed the role of a court jester in the past several times throughout the play. He attempts to speak the truth to authority, to those in power, to remind them that they too are subject to all of to death specifically, that they too will be forgotten in the end. Recall the image of the fat king. The fat king is no different than the lean beggar. They're each food for worms in the end. The Last Supper is not one at which they'll be sitting down to dine, but at one at which they'll be being eaten. They are the main dish, the main course at the Last Supper. And here Hamlet assumes the role of the court jester again. Look what he says. He once more he takes up a kind of mocking attitude here, doesn't he? He says, "Where be your jibes now? Your jokes, your gambols, frolics, your songs, your flashes of merriment that were wont to set the table on a roar." Come on, he's saying. Tell me a joke, sing me a song, and do a little dance for me. Make us all laugh. So you can see Hamlet here, in a sense, in a way, he's sort of mocking uh, the jester, this father figure for Hamlet, this figure in authority here, and he's reminding the jester that the jester too has died, as death has conquered. The conqueror worm, death, ultimately has come to Yorick, who, for Hamlet as a child, was in this position of authority, this position of power, another father figure. And here, death has defeated Yorick. And Hamlet continues in this vein, in this ridiculing vein, doesn't he? He's being sarcastic here, isn't he? Uh, Not now one to mock your own grinning. So you can imagine the grinning skull and him as saying, "Well, why aren't you making fun? Why aren't you mocking your own grin here?" Again, Hamlet is the one here mocking the grinning Yorick here, the grinning skull of Yorick. Quite chapfallen, and here Hamlet puns. Quite chapfallen, the idea, are you too dejected? Are you in such a bad mood here? Too upset or too melancholy to make a joke, to grin for us, to make fun of your own grinning? Quite chapfallen, old chap, and the idea of the chops too that have fallen, the missing jawbone here. quite chapfallen. So here Hamlet's punning. So again, it's this idea of the death in the end. Uh, One concludes, again, it's this kind of nihilistic view, right? That ultimately nothing matters in the universe because death in the end annihilates all. And true, it does. But remember, the realist would counter argue that there is something very meaningful in the universe, something of real value in the universe, and that is the conscious sentient beings on this planet who are experiencing pain and harm, so who are suffering. And that has meaning, that has real value. So, this idea, this nihilistic view of the universe ultimately, that nothing in the universe matters, that ultimately all is absurd and all is pointless, uh, no design or plan. Again, I would argue the realist would say that the nihilist is not thinking rationally, not thinking clearly. Um, and Hamlet here, not thinking clearly, is he? Look what he says next. Now, get you to my lady's chamber and tell her, let her paint an inch thick. To this favor she must come. So here, underscoring again the idea of vanity, all is vanity. The idea of the beautiful woman, the lady sitting at her vanity table and applying makeup. In a way, a kind of denial of death, isn't it? The paint, the makeup becomes a symbol for this denial of death. The idea that you can paint over the truth, the skull. Beneath the skin, of course, is the skull. And Hamlet is one of those people who sees the skull beneath the skin. He's confronted that. He's looked at it, and now he's looking at it up close and personal because of his personal relationship with Yorick. He sees the skull underneath the skin. And most people don't want to look at the skull beneath the skin. But tonight, when you go to sleep, as you lie back on your pillow, take your fingers and feel beneath the skin here. And you can feel the hollow sockets here around your eyes. You can feel the skull here. Feel the hollow socket behind the cartilage of your nose. Can you hear me with my hands in front of my mouth here? Yeah, you can feel the skull beneath the skin. And Hamlet is reminding Yorick, uh, ironically here, that and of course the lady at her table, the beautiful young lady who's painting an inch thick, and the paint here becomes this metaphor for denying one's death, not confronting it, ignoring it, isolating that thought, not looking at it. Remember, that's one of the strategies of the denial of death. She's painting it an inch thick. Uh, yes, she's determined. So, but that in the end, it's all futile. It's all pointless. It's all hopeless because to this favor, and he holds this, you can see him holding the skull. He's telling York, now go to my lady's chamber. Go, skull and all. Go and tell her, look, take a good close look. Go ahead and apply that makeup all you like. Slather it on as thick as you like, but this in the end is what you will become, and there is no escaping it. This is what's awaiting you. Make her laugh at that. Get the last laugh. Make her laugh at that. Tell her, let her paint an inch thick. To this favor she must come. Make her laugh at that. So again, I would argue here that Hamlet is not understanding what is of most value, what is of most importance here. He's focusing only on the absurdity, the pointlessness, the futility, the vanity of existence, because everyone comes to this particular end. king and beggar and beautiful lady. They all, in the end, are food for worms. They all become the grinning skull here. And he's not seeing what is of real value. Because if you think about it, the realist again would argue, the realist with this tragic narrative, who endorses the tragic narrative of the human story, would argue that death itself, in and of itself, is of no real value. How could it possibly be of real value? When someone is dead, someone no longer exists. The brain no longer is functioning. Consciousness ceases to exist. Remember, consciousness is a function of the brain. And when the brain ceases to exist, when the brain dies, so does consciousness. When the chessboard is overturned, the brain dies, so does the arrangement of all the chess pieces on the board. Consciousness is the particular arrangement, the neural network, and consciousness dies with the chess pieces are overturned with the board. So someone who is dead is not conscious and therefore cannot possibly be in a state of dissatisfaction or harm, cannot possibly be harmed, cannot possibly be suffering. So death in and of itself has no real value, just as the realist with this tragic understanding of the human story would argue that life has no real value, no intrinsic value. Life doesn't need to exist. It's only in the heads of human beings who believe life needs to exist because they are living. And dying sounds like a pretty terrifying process. For many people, it is. And people say, I'd rather avoid that dying thing. I'd rather just go about being addicted to my potato chips and, my Pepsi Cola and my video games and my cell phone. Yes, I'll avoid that pain, avoid that punishment. Uh, this idea that life becomes an addiction, but it only matters to those organisms that are living and who are projecting value onto life itself. But if they weren't living, remember the universe doesn't need human beings or any conscious sentient beings to exist. So both death, neither death nor life, this realist with this particular understanding of the human tale, the human narrative, would argue that neither life nor death has any real value. And that's what Hamlet is failing to understand. That's what his father figure, Yorick, of a, yet another failed father figure. You could argue that all of the father figures in this play have in some way failed Hamlet. In major ways, they have failed Hamlet. They failed to impress upon him, to teach him, to have that impact on his experiences in life, and failed to underscore what is of real value, what is of most important value, and that is suffering. And it's an easy lesson to learn. 1 + 1 = 2. Suffering is bad. But Hamlet, he learned the lesson for himself. Suffering is bad for him. Yes, he doesn't like it. But he's caught in that deterministic prison of his own ego and his own culture and his own biology, again, I would argue. That his suffering matters. That's what matters, not others' suffering. So, yes, I would argue here that Yorick fails to impress upon Hamlet. Hamlet's not focused on the pain and the suffering that Yorick experienced while living or while in the process of dying. That's not what's making his gorge rise. He's focused on only this idea of absurdity, his failed immortality project, this idea that, like his father, he too will be forgotten. Just like he mentions in the next passage, Alexander the Great is forgotten. Julius Caesar is forgotten. Hamlet the Elder, the King Hamlet, he is forgotten. And Hamlet, Prince Hamlet, will be forgotten, just as you and I will be forgotten in the end. This is what's disturbing Hamlet the most. He hasn't learned his lesson. He's never had the proper teacher. He's never had Shakespeare or Shakespeare's play come along and teach him what's most important. And that is that other people's suffering, indeed, other organisms, other species' suffering and pain and torture is just as important as Hamlet's. Just as important. No difference. Rationally speaking, no difference between other suffering, other conscious sentient beings suffering, and Hamlet's, and yours and mine. This is what this play is saying. This play is presenting the realist view of the universe and is presenting the tragic understanding of not only the human story, but the story, I would argue, it touches on it briefly, not to the extent as A Midsummer Night's Dream does, but it does touch on briefly this idea of all conscious sentient beings suffering is what is of real value here. And Hamlet doesn't learn this lesson. He doesn't, and he never will learn this lesson. To the bitter end, it will always be about Hamlet first and foremost. Hamlet's pain, Hamlet's name. He just won't be able to add 1 plus 1. Be gone.